Dear listeners, before we start today's story, please let us know your location in the comments section and don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Mark Wilson. I'm 32 years old and proud to work as a fireman with the local fire department. My job isn't easy, far from it. It's not just about getting cats down from trees, as some people like to joke. It's about saving lives, real human lives, often in the most dangerous and desperate situations. It takes courage, endurance, and sometimes a willingness to stare death in the face. But I loved it because, deep down, I believed it made a difference. It gave me a sense of purpose. I was married to Susan. She was 29 when everything happened, and she was extraordinary. At least, that's what I used to think. She worked as the CEO of a marketing firm. A big deal. Big money. A job that came with all the perks and pressures of someone in her position. I'll admit, her success intimidated me at first, but she never made me feel less than. At least, I thought she didn't. We had a son, Toby. He was only 4 years old at the time, but he was my whole world, my reason for everything. After long, grueling shifts at the firehouse, no matter how drained or battered I felt, the thought of coming home to Toby kept me going. His laugh, his tiny hands reaching out for me when I walked through the door, the way his face lit up whenever I said his name. It made every risk, every sacrifice worth it. Susan and I had our fair share of challenges. Balancing her high-powered career with my unpredictable hours wasn't always easy, but I thought we were managing it. I thought we had something real. Susan was sharp, confident, beautiful, everything I admired in a partner. And she loved me. Or at least, I thought she did. About a year after Toby turned 3, things started to go downhill. At first, it was subtle. Small changes that I brushed off as the usual ebb and flow of life. But looking back, I can see it clearly now. It began when a new guy joined Susan's firm. He was a senior manager, sharp-looking, ambitious, the kind of guy who knew how to climb the corporate ladder with ease. At first, I didn't think much of him. Susan mentioned him casually here and there. His name would pop up in conversations about work, office projects, or meetings. He was just another colleague, someone she occasionally interacted with, or so I thought. But soon enough, he wasn't just another colleague. He became Susan's direct repartee, and his rise in the company was fast, unusually fast. I chalked it up to him being talented or lucky, but something about the whole situation left a sour taste in my mouth. Then there were the little things. He started coming to our house. At first, it was for work-related reasons, picking up some documents, dropping off something Susan had forgotten at the office. Innocent enough. But then he began showing up more regularly. He'd come to pick her up for work in the mornings, his sleek car parked in our driveway, while I was still getting Toby ready for the day. I found it odd. Susan had a perfectly nice car of her own, a luxury sedan that she adored when she first bought it. She never minded driving before, even in heavy traffic. So why now? Why did she suddenly need a ride to work? When I asked her about it, she had all kinds of answers, practical ones, at least on the surface. I just don't feel like driving these days, she said with a shrug, as if it was no big deal. It saves the environment, she added, like she was doing the planet a favor by carpooling. I can start my work early in the car, she explained, tossing in a smile, as though that would make it all make sense. Excuses. That's all they were. Excuses that piled up, one after the other. It didn't take long before his name started coming up more and more, especially at the dinner table. At first, it was harmless enough, or so I told myself. She'd mention a funny story he told her at work or a new initiative he was leading. But soon, the mentions turned into outright praises. Did you know he's a single father? Susan said one evening, twirling her fork in her salad. It's amazing how he manages everything. His job, his son's football practices, and still finds time to volunteer on weekends. He's just so involved. I clenched my jaw but stayed silent, hoping she'd move on to another topic. She didn't. And his son. Oh my God, Mark, you should see him. He's incredible at football. Just like his dad, athletic and disciplined. They're such a great team. Sounds like it, I muttered, keeping my eyes on my plate, trying to ignore the knot tightening in my chest. And he's so insightful, she continued, oblivious, or maybe indifferent, to my growing discomfort. The way he handled that new campaign was genius. I mean, you can tell he's got a mind for this stuff. And did I mention he has a degree from Harvard? Honestly, it's inspiring. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Susan, I said, setting my fork down with a sharp clink. Can you stop bringing your work to the dinner table? This is supposed to be family time, not a recap of how amazing your colleague is. She blinked at me, clearly taken aback by my tone. Then her expression hardened. What's your problem, Mark? Are you jealous or something? Jealous? I echoed, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Jealous of what, Susan? The fact that you can't seem to stop talking about another man while we're sitting here with our son? Yeah, maybe I am a little jealous. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You know what? Maybe you should be. He is more educated than you. And he's smarter than you too. I don't see why that's such a bad thing to acknowledge. Well, that was it. I sat there for a moment, stunned, trying to process what she had just said. I could feel my anger bubbling up, threatening to spill over. But I didn't want to lash out, not in front of Toby, who was sitting there quietly, clearly confused by the tension. Without another word, I pushed my chair back and got up. I'm done, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. I walked away, leaving the dinner table and the sting of her words behind me. The house was cold. Not physically. We had the heater running as usual, but emotionally, it was as if someone had turned the warmth off and left us in a void. The silence was deafening. Susan and I barely exchanged words, just the bare minimum needed to get through the days. I wasn't going to lay down and beg her to fix this. Whatever was happening between us, it wasn't something I could fight alone. And maybe, deep down, I was starting to wonder if I even should. Then one night, while I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television, my fire department pager buzzed, followed almost immediately by the shrill ring of the phone. I picked it up, and the dispatcher's voice came through urgently. Mark, we've got a massive fire downtown. Residential building. Multiple units. Families trapped. We need you on site immediately. Within minutes, I was in my gear and driving to the scene, my mind already racing through protocols and scenarios. But nothing could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me when I arrived. The building was engulfed in flames. Smoke billowed into the night sky, turning it a hellish orange. Residents stood huddled on the street, some in pajamas, others clutching what little they had managed to grab in their escape. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning wood and chemicals, and the sound of crackling fire mixed with the cries of the displaced. As we set up hoses and assessed the situation, a frantic mother broke through the crowd, screaming at the top of her lungs. My baby is still inside. Her face was streaked with tears and soot, her voice raw with desperation. Her husband stood beside her, pale and shaking, his hands trembling as he clutched her shoulders, trying to steady her. What floor? I asked, already tightening the straps on my helmet. The third, she sobbed. The left apartment. He's in his room. I didn't hesitate. My captain gave me a nod, and I rushed toward the inferno with my partner, the heat hitting us like a wall the moment we stepped inside. Visibility was almost zero, the smoke so thick it felt like it was clawing at my lungs even through the mask. We navigated through the maze of burning debris, the sound of the fire roaring in our ears. When we reached the third floor, the heat was almost unbearable. I could hear the child crying faintly, his voice muffled but unmistakable. Over here, I shouted to my partner, pointing toward a door that was partially ajar. The flames were licking at the edges, threatening to consume it entirely. I kicked the door open and saw him. A little boy, no older than 5, curled up in the corner of the room, clutching a stuffed animal. His face was streaked with tears, and his small body shook with fear. It's okay, buddy, I said as gently as I could, crouching down and reaching out to him. I'm here to get you out. I promise you're going to be okay. He didn't resist as I scooped him up, holding him close to shield him from the heat. His tiny arms wrapped around my neck, and I could feel his heart pounding against my chest. My partner cleared the way as we made our way back, each step feeling like a mile as the fire closed in around us. When we finally emerged from the building, the crowd erupted in cheers and cries of relief. The medics rushed over, taking the boy from my arms to check him over. He was coughing, but he was alive. Thank God, he was alive. I stood there, catching my breath, as the boy's mother ran toward the ambulance. The moment she saw him, she let out a cry that I'll never forget, a sound of pure, raw relief. She scooped him up in her arms, hugging him so tightly it was as if she was trying to fuse them back together. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, and grabbed my hand. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you so much. You saved my baby. You saved him. Her husband approached me next, his face streaked with soot and tears. He didn't say a word at first, just pulled me into a hug, a tight, almost desperate embrace. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I'm forever in your debt, he said. If you ever need anything at all, I'll be there. You have my word. I nodded, unable to find the right words to respond. Moments like these were what made it all worth it. The risks, the danger, the long hours. For all the coldness I felt at home, here, in this moment, I felt warmth again. The next morning, I got a call from my captain. He sounded proud as he said, "Mark, you're going to be recognized by the mayor on Sunday for your bravery last night. Bring your family. It's a big deal, and they'll be so proud of you." I hung up the phone, my chest swelling with a mix of pride and anticipation. When I got home, I couldn't wait to share the news. Toby was sitting on the living room floor, building towers with his blocks. I crouched down next to him, ruffling his hair. "Hey, buddy," I said with a grin. "Guess what? Daddy is getting an award this Sunday. The mayor is going to give it to me because I helped save that little boy from the fire." Toby's eyes lit up, and he clapped his hands excitedly. "Wow, Daddy, you're a hero," he said, his voice full of awe. Hearing him say that made my heart swell. "You're coming with me, champ," I said. "It's going to be a big day for us." Just then, I heard footsteps, and Susan appeared in the doorway, holding her phone. She must have overheard the conversation because, to my surprise, she walked over and wrapped her arms around me in a warm hug. "That's amazing, Mark," she said, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. "I'm proud of you." I returned the hug, a flicker of hope lighting up inside me. Maybe this was the start of something better between us. "Thanks," I said, pulling back slightly to look at her. "We need to be there on Sunday, all of us. It's a big day for me. I want you and Toby by my side." She hesitated for just a moment, her eyes darting away before she said, "I'll try to make it, but I might not be able to." The flicker of hope dimmed. I frowned, trying to understand. "What do you mean you might not be able to? What's more important than this?" She shifted uncomfortably, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Steve's son has his birthday party on Sunday," she said. "Since he doesn't have a mother, I've been helping him plan it. He needs me there." I felt my stomach drop, the warmth of the moment evaporating. I pulled back from her hug, standing up straight and looking at her, trying to process what I just heard. "You're telling me," I said slowly, my voice calm but laced with disbelief, "that you might miss one of the most important days of my career because you're busy planning a birthday party for Steve's son? He doesn't have anyone else, Mark," she said defensively. "It's just one day, and I promised I'd help." I took a step back, crossing my arms as a bitter laugh escaped me. "Yep, it's just one day, like they give me an award every other day, right? So, Susan, are you planning to play mommy to someone else's son?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my rising frustration. Looking Susan in the eye, I said firmly, "I expect to see you at the venue on Sunday, Susan. If you're not there, it'll prove something I don't want to believe, that you're willing to choose others over your own family." Susan let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms. "Mark, you're blowing this completely out of proportion. You're acting like a child. It's a birthday party for a little boy who doesn't have a mom. You need to grow up and stop competing for my attention, especially with a child." Her words stung, but I refused to back down. "Grow up?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I'm your husband, Susan. I shouldn't even have to compete for your attention, especially not with someone else's child. Do you even hear how ridiculous this sounds?" She rolled her eyes, the gesture hitting me like a slap. "Mark, it's not about competition. I'm just trying to help someone who needs me." "Well, maybe you should think about who needs you more," I said, my tone cutting. "Your son and your husband, or Steve and his kid. I've had enough of this. I really hope you make the right decision, Susan, for all of our sakes." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder. I stared at her for a moment longer, hoping for some flicker of understanding or guilt, but all I saw was stubborn defiance. Shaking my head, I turned and walked out of the room, the silence between us louder than any argument we could have had. Sunday arrived, and I stood in the hall, dressed in my uniform, feeling a mix of pride and unease. The ceremony was set to begin in a few minutes, and Toby was by my side, beaming with excitement. He was dressed in his little firefighter costume, complete with a plastic helmet. "Look, Daddy, I'm just like you," he said, tugging on my hand. I knelt down and adjusted his helmet with a smile. "That's right, buddy. You're my little hero today." The crowd began to gather, and I noticed Fred and Welma arriving with little Mike, the boy I had saved. Fred was holding Mike's hand tightly, and Welma had tears in her eyes. As soon as they saw me, they hurried over. "Mark," Welma said, her voice trembling as she hugged me. "We can't thank you enough. You saved our baby." Fred extended his hand, his grip firm and full of emotion. "You're a good man, Mark. We owe you everything." If you ever need anything at all, you call me. Okay? I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I'm just glad he's safe, I said, glancing at Mike, who was clinging to his mom. That's what matters. Just then, my captain, Bruce Morgan, approached. A no-nonsense guy with a gravelly voice and a heart of gold. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. Wilson, he said, grinning. Big day for you. I told you to bring your family. Where's your wife? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile and said, she had other engagements today. Couldn't make it. Bruce's grin faded, replaced by a furrowed brow. Other engagements? He repeated, his voice sharp. What could be more important than her husband getting an award for being a hero? I had no answer for him. I just stood there, the smile plastered on my face, feeling the weight of his words settle heavily on my shoulders. It's fine, Captain, I managed to say, brushing it off. But inside it wasn't fine. Not at all. As the ceremony began and I stepped up to receive the award, the applause ringing in my ears, I couldn't shake the emptiness I felt. Susan's absence wasn't just noticeable, it was a statement. When I looked at the small plaque in my hands that read hero, I couldn't help but feel like a fraud. How could I be a hero at work, but feel so powerless in my own marriage? As I smiled for the cameras and patted Toby on the head, the truth gnawed at me. My marriage was on thin ice, and I had no idea how to stop it from cracking. That evening, Susan came home carrying a cake and bags of takeout, her usual confident demeanor intact. Toby was still running around in his little firefighter outfit, proudly showing off his badge to anyone who'd listen, even if it was just me. Susan set everything down on the dining table and started unpacking the food with an air of casualness, as if nothing had happened. Dinner's here, she called out cheerfully, arranging the plates. Come on, let's eat. I leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment. Are you sure you're going to eat in 3 plates? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She paused, glancing at me in confusion. What? You guys aren't eating? I shrugged, keeping my gaze on her. We already ate. Her brows furrowed, and she set down the utensils with a clatter. Why? We always have dinner as a family, she said, a mix of surprise and irritation in her voice. I crossed my arms and let out a bitter laugh. Key words for you there, Susan. We used to do a lot of things as a family. But then you decided to start playing mommy to kids who aren't your own. My voice was rising now, and I couldn't stop it. The frustration, the disappointment, the hurt, it all came spilling out. Her face hardened, and she shot back without missing a beat. Maybe you're right, she said, her voice cutting like a knife. Maybe I should play mommy to others, because my husband is a worthless piece of shit who can't handle his emotions and gets jealous of a little boy. Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I just stood there, staring at her, the weight of everything between us pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You know what, Susan? I said, stepping closer to her and lowering my voice, though it was no less firm. I wish you all the best. Truly, I do. And I hope your next husband is considerate enough to let you play mommy to the whole damn town. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't wait for her to recover. I turned around, walked to the door, and grabbed my coat. I didn't look back as I walked out of the house. When I got to my mother's place, I knocked softly, feeling the weight of the evening bearing down on me. She opened the door, her face a mixture of concern and calm. Mark, she said, stepping aside to let me in. What brings you here this late? You look tired. Can I stay the night? I asked, my voice quiet, almost apologetic. Of course. Come in, she said, closing the door behind me. She gestured toward the couch, and I sank into it. She sat down across from me, studying me carefully. So, you had a fight, she said, more a statement than a question. How bad is it? I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to find the right words. It might be the last one, I said finally, my voice heavy with resignation. She raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on her lips. Are you sure it's that bad? She asked. Is she cheating on you? I let out a dry laugh and shook my head. Not cheating, I said, but it feels like the same. She chose another man's son's birthday over me getting awarded. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Is your pride hurt? She asked slowly. Or is it really that bad? I looked at her, my eyes stinging slightly, though I wouldn't let the tears come. I tried, Mom, I said. I tried to make her see how important it was, to make her change her decision. But she didn't. She's still on her high horse. I paused, the words catching in my throat for a moment before continuing. I know people talk about us, about how she's this high-earning CEO, and I'm just a low-paid firefighter. Maybe it's been bothering her all this time. Maybe it's bothering me too. She sighed and leaned forward, resting her hands on her knees. I can always make that call, son, she said gently. You know I can. But if I do, you'll never be who you are. I looked at her, my heart aching but resolute. No, I said firmly. I don't need that in my life. It's simple so far. I have a son to look after. At home, Susan called her friend Megan, the HR head, and told her that Mark has left home after a fight. Megan asked her to stay strong and things will get better. A few minutes in, Susan sat on the couch, her face in her hands, when Steve walked in uninvited, holding a bottle of wine. Susan, he said softly, setting the bottle on the table. I heard you had a rough night. Thought you could use some company. She glanced up at him, her eyes red from crying. Steve, how did you know? Oh, did Megan tell you? And I don't think. He cut her off, sitting down beside her. Hey, I'm just here to support you. You don't deserve this kind of treatment. You're an incredible woman, Susan. Successful, smart, beautiful. Your husband should be proud of you, not holding you back. Susan shook her head. Mark isn't holding me back. He's just different. He doesn't understand. Steve leaned closer, his voice smooth and reassuring. He's jealous, Susan. You know that, right? He's jealous of your success, your independence. He's a low-level guy. What does he even bring to the table besides his pride and insecurities? Steve, stop, she said, her voice firm, though her resolve wavered. But he didn't stop. Susan, listen to me. You're wasting your time with him. You're a CEO, for crying out loud. You deserve someone on your level, someone who understands you, appreciates you, and doesn't get threatened by you. She sighed, rubbing her temples. It's not that simple, Steve. We have a son together. I can't just... Steve interrupted again, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. I love you, Susan. I've loved you since the day I met you. And Toby? I'd take him as my own. He deserves better too. Someone who can give him the kind of life you can provide. Susan's breath hitched slightly, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. When she opened them, she looked directly at him, her expression unreadable. Steve, I need time to process this. Please, just go. Steve hesitated, his hand reaching out to touch hers, but she pulled away. Susan, go, she repeated, her tone firmer this time. He nodded reluctantly, standing up and grabbing his coat. All right, but I meant what I said. You deserve better. As the door closed behind him, Susan sat in silence, staring at the empty space where he had been. I just need time, she whispered to herself. I need time to process this. The next day, Susan sat in her office, her eyes narrowed in frustration as Megan sat across from her, looking nervous. The tension in the room was palpable. Megan, Susan began, her voice cold and controlled. I trusted you. How could you let my private conversation with Steve get out? This is not just gossip. It's my personal life. Megan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands clasped together. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. It was just... Steve was talking to you about some personal stuff, and I thought maybe you needed someone to listen. Susan's eyes narrowed further, her patience wearing thin. I don't need anyone speaking on my behalf, Megan. You don't understand what this is doing to me. Before Megan could respond, the door opened and Steve walked in, looking casual yet confident. He glanced between Susan and Megan and then spoke gently, as if trying to mediate. Susan, I don't think this is Megan's fault, Steve said, his tone calm but firm. We all want what's best for you. We're just trying to make sure you're okay. You've been through a lot, and we want to help you. Susan's eyes flicked to Steve, her expression hardening. I don't need your help, Steve. I need time to process what's going on. I've been trying to figure things out on my own, and I don't appreciate you involving others. Steve's expression softened as he stepped closer to her. Susan, please. We all care about you. Don't shut me out. Don't shut Megan out. We just want you to be happy. Susan stood up abruptly, her voice sharp as she turned towards Steve. I said, I don't want to discuss this anymore. You need to leave. Steve hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback by her outburst. Susan, you know I'm here for you. But if you want me to go, I'll go. Susan didn't say anything more but simply motioned to the door. Steve nodded reluctantly and left, closing the door behind him. Once he was gone, Susan let out a heavy sigh and collapsed back into her chair. Her mind was swirling with conflicting emotions, but all she could say to herself was, I just need time. I need time to process this. Now back with Mark. I didn't answer any of Susan's calls. I couldn't bring myself to hear her voice, not after everything that had happened. When I heard that she'd gone to the station trying to find me, I felt a pang of something deep inside me, but I knew it wasn't the time. I couldn't face her yet. The guys at the station knew what was going on. They could tell something was off. We'd all been through enough together that they could see the strain in my eyes. I wasn't hiding it, and I wasn't pretending anymore. When I saw them in the locker room the next morning, there was no need for words. They just nodded at me, letting me know they had my back. Hey, Mark, Jason, one of the newer guys, spoke up. We got your six, man. Don't worry about what's going on outside of here. We know what she did. You're one of us. I nodded, barely able to force a smile. Thanks, guys. Tom, who had been with the department longer than anyone, put a hand on my shoulder. Listen, we don't care what happens in your personal life. You're a brother to us. Always have been. Always will be. They all looked at me, their expressions serious but understanding. The kind of loyalty that came with being a part of something bigger than just a job. Don't let her get to you, Mark, Jake added, his voice steady. Whatever happens, we're with you. That hit me harder than I expected. It was as if, for the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. My brothers at the station, they had my back. They had no idea how much that meant. I just nodded, not trusting my voice, and walked away from them to get ready for the next call. Susan felt overwhelmed. The weight of the tension at home, her guilt, and the feeling of isolation had taken its toll on her. Her mind raced with thoughts of what had happened with Mark, the unresolved issues, and the harsh words exchanged. Work had become more challenging, too, and she couldn't focus the way she used to. One afternoon, Megan, a close friend from work, noticed how off Susan seemed. Megan had always been there for her, and she saw the sadness in Susan's eyes. Hey, you look like you could use a break. Want to go out for drinks tonight? We could catch up, have some fun, forget about everything for a bit. Susan hesitated for a moment, but the thought of getting away from her own mind, if only for a few hours, was tempting. I guess a drink wouldn't hurt, she replied, still feeling drained. She called a babysitter to look after Toby, though she felt a pang of guilt leaving him behind. But tonight was for her. She needed to let go, even if just for a while. When she arrived at the bar, Megan was already there, waiting for her with a warm smile. Susan took a deep breath as she walked up to her, trying to shake off the heaviness she had been carrying. Thanks for convincing me, Susan said, sitting down. Of course. You deserve a break, believe me. You've been going through a lot. They chatted for a while, sharing stories and lighthearted banter. It felt good to laugh again, even if it was just for a moment. But as the night went on, more drinks were poured, and Susan started to feel the effects. Megan and Susan both had a few too many, but Susan's mind kept drifting back to Mark. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't stop thinking about how everything had spiraled out of control. Soon, the conversation turned to Steve, who had shown up at the bar a little later. He'd been a comforting presence lately, offering her support in ways she didn't realize she needed. He was kind, understanding, and always there when she needed someone to talk to. Megan had invited him along, figuring it would lift Susan's spirits. But as the night continued, Susan found herself caught in a strange emotional whirlwind. Steve was there, offering comfort in the form of jokes and gestures, but Susan couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing control of herself. By the time they were all leaving the bar, she was tipsy, her mind foggy, and she didn't want to be alone with her thoughts. Steve offered to drive her home, and she agreed, not fully processing the decision. She just wanted the night to end and hoped the alcohol would numb the ache for a while. But what happened after that was a blur. She woke up the next morning, still a bit disoriented, unsure of what had transpired. She was naked and saw that Steve was sleeping beside her also naked. She quickly ran to the bathroom and hurled everything in the toilet. She washed her face and quickly searched for her clothes, got dressed and got out of the house. She walked a few blocks and called a cab. The moment Susan stepped out of the cab and saw the chaos, her heart dropped. The entire house was engulfed in smoke, the fire still smoldering as firefighters worked tirelessly to control the blaze. She felt her legs give way beneath her, the shock hitting her like a physical blow. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. She rushed forward, ignoring the firefighters and medics around her, her eyes searching desperately for any sign of Toby. The scene felt surreal. Everything was blurry, distorted, like she was walking through a nightmare. She asked one of the firefighters, "What happened here?" He said, "Electric short circuit, and that led to the fire." And then she saw Mark. He stood near a group of medics, his face drawn and grim. His body language was rigid, almost mechanical. There was a body bag beside him, and a stretcher was being carefully moved towards an ambulance. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she fought to keep herself together. She pushed through the crowd, her voice trembling as she called out, "Mark, where's Toby? Please, where's my son?" Mark turned toward her, his expression unreadable for a split second before his eyes locked onto her. His gaze flickered, and Susan felt a wave of guilt wash over her heart sinking as she remembered the bruises on her neck, the trace of her betrayal, the consequences of her own actions. Without saying a word, Mark turned and shouted to another man nearby, instructing him to hold Susan back. But Susan fought against the man's grip, her panic mounting. "Mark, please," she cried, her voice cracking. "Where is Toby? Where is he?" In that moment, Mark's eyes hardened, his jaw tightened. The raw emotion in his face was overwhelming. Then, with a guttural shout, he screamed, "He's dead." The words hit her like a ton of bricks. Her entire body seemed to collapse in on itself. Her knees buckled, and she felt as if the world was crumbling beneath her. Dead. Her son. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. The sound of Mark's voice was distant, echoing in her ears, but all she could hear now was the ringing silence inside her mind, drowning out everything else. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, refusing to believe it. "No, that's not true. It can't be true." But deep down, she knew. She knew what Mark had said was real. The medics continued their work. They loaded the babysitter she hired on the stretcher. She was badly burnt and was moaning in pain. But for Susan, the world had stopped. Susan's world felt like it was spinning as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain and confusion were overwhelming. When she finally regained some clarity, she found herself in a sterile hospital room, the dim light casting an unsettling glow on the walls. As her eyes adjusted, she saw a familiar face, Steve. He was sitting by her bed, a grin on his face that felt all wrong in this moment. "Hey, sunshine, how are you?" he said, his voice too calm, too casual. A surge of panic shot through Susan's chest. She was disoriented, but the sight of him in the room made everything click into place. She tried to push herself up, her heart racing. "Get out," she screamed, her voice hoarse and full of terror. Her mind was still reeling, the pieces of the night before slowly coming together. Drugged, assaulted. Her body screamed with the knowledge of what had happened. She needed help. She needed answers. "Get out, Steve," she repeated, her voice breaking. Without hesitation, she reached out and grabbed the nurse's call button, her fingers shaking as she pressed it desperately. "Please," she pleaded, "call the cops. I've been drugged. I've been assaulted. Get him out of here." Steve stood, his smile faltering for a moment, before he turned and swiftly exited the room, leaving her with a sense of dread that only deepened as he vanished down the hallway. The nurse quickly entered, concern written across her face as she went to Susan's side. "Susan, are you all right? What's going on?" the nurse asked, her voice calm but firm. Susan could barely speak. The memories from the night before were a blur, a haze that she couldn't fully grasp. She struggled to make sense of it all, but one thing was clear. Steve had been involved, and so had Megan. "I need to speak to the police," Susan said, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth she now had to face. The nurse nodded and left to make the call. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, their presence commanding yet gentle as they approached her bed. They took her statement, asking her about the events leading up to her hospitalization, and Susan told them everything about Megan asking her to come with her and how she found that Steve was already there. She remembered the drinks and how Steve offered her a ride home and how she found herself in his bed at his home. She could barely hold herself together as she spoke, but the officers listened carefully, taking down every word. As the day went on, the hospital ran a battery of tests to confirm what Susan feared. When the results came back, the blood test confirmed her worst suspicions. She had been drugged and assaulted. The officers immediately went to work, coordinating with other departments to search for Steve and Megan. They were already on the run, their whereabouts unknown. But Susan's world had already shattered. The pieces were falling apart too quickly for her to catch, and even though she had people now trying to help her, it felt like the damage was done. The betrayal, the assault, the loss. It was all too much to bear. Susan lay in the hospital bed, staring at the blank walls around her, her thoughts a tangled mess of regret, grief, and longing. She had been in a fog since the moment she woke up, the reality of her son's death crashing over her like a wave she couldn't outrun. But beyond that, beyond the overwhelming pain of losing Toby, there was a quiet ache in her chest, a deep yearning for Mark. She had messed up so much, hurt him in ways that she could never take back, but she missed him. She longed for him. The hours stretched on, each one feeling heavier than the last. She thought about the choices she had made, the decisions that had led her here, and she couldn't help but feel utterly lost. No matter what had happened between them, Mark was still her husband, the man she had built a life with, the man she loved. As evening fell, a nurse came in to check on her, but Susan barely registered the woman's presence. Her thoughts were elsewhere, focused on the one person who could make all of this seem just a little bit less unbearable. Then, as if by some miracle, Mark appeared. He stepped into the room, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of their shared pain hanging between them. No words were needed. He walked toward her slowly, sitting beside her on the bed, his hand gently reaching for hers. Susan felt a surge of emotion rise in her chest as she clutched his hand, unable to keep the tears from flowing. Without thinking, she leaned into him and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. The grief that had been building up inside her came pouring out in a torrent of sobs. Mark held her, his arms wrapping around her in a way that made everything feel almost normal again, even if only for a brief moment. The pain in his own eyes was undeniable, but he didn't say anything. They didn't need to talk. They were two parents who had just lost their child, and the silence between them spoke louder than any words ever could. But after a long time, Mark finally pulled away slightly, his hand still resting gently on her back as he looked down at her. His voice was rough, broken, but steady. The house burnt down due to a short circuit. Toby and Lily were in the upper floor and the fire started from the ground floor. They had no idea about the fire until the whole ground floor was burning. They had no escape, Anne. Mark stopped and wiped a tear. Then he took a deep breath and said, "I filed for a divorce, Susan." Susan felt her heart drop, her breath catching in her throat. She pulled back slightly, staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mark, please. You'll be served once you're out of the hospital," he continued, his voice cold but filled with an underlying sadness that mirrored her own. She felt the floor drop out from under her as she crumpled, her emotions completely unraveling. Her body shook with the force of her sobs as she fell to her knees before him, desperate and broken. "Please, Mark," she pleaded, her voice choked with grief. "Please don't leave me. I know I messed up, but I never cheated on you. I didn't mean for things to get this far. Please." Mark looked down at her, his face a mixture of pain and sorrow. The tears in his eyes mirrored her own, but he said nothing for a moment. He just stared, watching as the woman he loved, the woman he had shared so much with, crumbled in front of him. Susan collapsed further, her body racked with sobs as she clung to his legs, begging him to stay. But Mark didn't move to console her. He simply stood there, looking down at her, his heart breaking as he made the hardest decision of his life. Now let's check from Mark's point of view. I stood there, looking down at Susan, my heart heavy with pain. Her face was streaked with tears, her sobs echoing through the room. "Susan," I began, my voice steady but raw, "I'm not filing for divorce because what happened to you yesterday night. No, that's not it. I could have overlooked that. Hell, I could have worked through that. But the reason I'm doing this is because you don't respect me. You've never truly valued me as your husband, as your partner. You don't see me as an equal." Her eyes widened at my words, but I couldn't stop now. I had to say it. A marriage is about balance, Susan. It's about two people, standing side by side. It's not about who makes more money or who has a fancier job title. It's about the effort both people put in. And you've always acted like you were the superior one, like your success made you better than me, like I didn't matter. I could see her trembling, but I wasn't done. I know what happened to you, Susan. I know you were set up. I know you were drugged, manipulated, and assaulted. But you want to know the real reason I can't forgive you? Because you looked at Steve like he was the superior one, like he had something I didn't. Well, look where that got you. Her eyes flashed with guilt, but I pressed on. Now, Steve's on the run, a criminal. And I'm still here. I'm still standing tall, an honest man, a firefighter, a hero. You chose to follow him, Susan. You chose to walk that path, even when I was here, ready to support you. And now look at where we are. A child is gone. A marriage is broken. And you're left alone, realizing that the man you turned your back on, your husband, was still the one who would have stood by your side. I stared down at her, my heart breaking all over again, but I knew I couldn't let myself be dragged back. I put everything on the line for you, for us, your husband, and you could never see it. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. But this is where it ends. You've made your choices, Susan, and now I'm making mine. And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving her to process everything. Susan lay there on the floor when a nurse came in and helped her up. She gently helped her onto the bed and tucked her in. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and in walked an old man, leaning on a cane. Behind him, 6 towering men entered. The old man made his way to the side of Susan's bed, and one of the large men pulled a stool closer for him. The man sat down with an air of authority, his eyes glinting with a sinister understanding. "So, you are Susan, my son Mark's wife," he said. But before she could open her mouth, he raised his hand to stop her. "I know he never told you about me," the old man continued, "but it's not his fault. You see, I'm a bad man. I run a criminal empire that spans over 100 countries. And Mark is an honest man, living the life I once wanted." He paused, his eyes narrowing, and Susan couldn't help but shiver under his gaze. "Now, it seems that my grandson is no more, and I'm not pleased with that news," he said, his voice darkening. "My first decision was to have you sent to hell, but then some details came out. Hints that your boy played a game. I find that rather interesting." The old man's lips twisted into something like a grim smile as he continued. "Now, I also find that my son has filed for a divorce. You see, I don't want to interfere in his life, but if he wants you gone, then I want you gone." A chill ran down Susan's spine. "I've never requested anything from anyone before," the old man said, his tone now oddly calm. "But I'm doing it now. As his father, I request you sign the divorce papers and leave the city. You will not have the luxury of staying here. This is the way it must be." The old man slowly rose from his stool, his movements deliberate and calculating. He glanced around the room one last time, and as he approached the door, he paused. Without a word, he turned back towards Susan. The old man drew near Susan, his eyes never leaving her face, and his hand, gnarled with age, reached out to rest on her forehead. "I know about Steve and Megan," he said, his voice soft but laced with malice. "I never had a daughter," he said, his tone now eerily calm. "But since you still are my daughter-in-law, I promise you this." His words hung heavy in the air as his fingers pressed lightly against her forehead, almost as if sealing the promise in some twisted way. "The two will not see the light of another day." With that, he slowly withdrew his hand, straightened his back, and without another word, turned to leave. The next morning, Susan was finally discharged from the hospital. Her body felt weak, her mind still swirling with the aftermath of everything that had happened. As promised, the divorce papers were delivered to her home. Mark had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She held the papers in her hands, trembling. Tears blurred her vision as the reality of the situation sank in. She had lost everything. Her husband, her child. She was betrayed by people she called friends, and now all she could do was sit there, holding the papers, as the sobs racked her body. She moved into a smaller house that she owned near her office. Her grief was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell ringing. She wiped her tears and made her way to the door, not knowing who to expect. When she opened it, a uniformed officer stood there, his face grim. "Miss Susan, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we have some news," the officer said, his voice serious. "We've found 2 bodies, Megan and Steve. We were hoping you could tell us anything about their deaths." "I don't know anything about that," Susan managed to say, her voice strained. "I had nothing to do with it." The officer nodded, clearly not convinced, but he said no more. "If you remember anything, please don't hesitate to reach out." He turned and left without another word. As the door clicked shut, Susan stood motionless for a long moment. She was alone. She didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to start picking up the pieces of a life that had fallen apart. The divorce proceedings began with Susan trying to fight it, despite her father-in-law's chilling warning. She stood firm and did not want to lose her husband. Mark remained silent, his lawyer handling the bulk of talking. The judge, seeing no resolution in sight, adjourned the proceedings for the day, setting another date for the continuation. Later that evening, as Susan tried to digest everything, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was cold and threatening. "Sign the divorce papers, or there will be consequences." Susan burst out on the man on the line. "I have nothing to lose. Without my husband, there is no point of living. So do what you have to do. I am fighting for my husband." Susan resigned from her job. Susan was offered a large sum of hush money by the company, eager to avoid any bad press. They insisted she remain silent about everything that had happened. Susan accepted, feeling trapped but needing the financial security. When the next court date arrived, the judge, sensing the tension between Susan and Mark, suggested counseling. Both were ordered to attend, in hopes of resolving their issues outside the courtroom. The counseling session was quiet, save for the soft sniffles and occasional sobs. Mark sat across from Susan, his face tense with frustration. "You've disrespected me, Susan," Mark said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You ignored our marriage, put everything else before me, before us." Susan's heart sank, but she didn't interrupt. She simply looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Mark. I've been selfish. I didn't see what I was doing. I didn't understand, but I see it now." Mark's eyes softened, though his anger still lingered. "It's like you didn't care about our life together anymore." It hurt. Susan nodded, accepting the sting of his words. "I never meant to hurt you. I've been blind, and I've failed you." She took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. "I want to fix this. I want to be the wife you deserve." Mark stared at her, searching her face for sincerity. "I've left my job," she continued, her voice steady. "I'm willing to be a housewife. I'll support you. I'll be there for you. I want to be your wife, a firefighter's wife." She looked up at him, her heart exposed. "I'll do whatever it takes." The room was silent for a moment. Mark didn't know how to respond. It was all so much to process. But Susan's words hung in the air, the weight of her sacrifice clear. After a few more sessions, the walls between Mark and Susan began to crumble. Slowly, they found themselves talking more openly, addressing their issues, and healing in ways they hadn't before. The counselor, watching them, gave a small nod. "It's good to see you both willing to work through this. Keep going." That evening, Mark and Susan returned home together. The divorce case was officially dropped. They now had to rebuild what they had lost. In the park, Mark's parents sat side by side on a bench, the quiet sound of birds fluttering around them. Brenda, gazing at the birds, spoke softly. "I come here often, feed the birds, and then head home," she said, her voice calm. John nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I know." She glanced at him, a curious look in her eyes. "So, you didn't kill Susan?" John smiled, a dark, knowing smile. "She was willing to die for him. She knew who I am, what I've done. She knew I killed Steve and Megan. But even then, she wasn't willing to let go of him. You don't let go of a wife who's willing to die for you." Brenda smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. After a moment, he responded, "I remember such a woman. Took 3 bullets for me." Brenda turned to him, her gaze tender, her voice filled with nostalgia. "Yes, my dear." They sat in silence for a moment, their hands intertwining. Brenda's voice broke the stillness. "I would go to hell and back for you, my love," she said quietly, "but I had to raise your son." John's eyes grew misty, a tear threatening to fall. He squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, my dear, and you did a great job." They sat together, their bond strengthened by years of shared history, their love unspoken yet deeply felt. 3 years later, Mark and Susan sat together in their living room, watching their son, Toby, play with his toys. He was the spitting image of their lost son, the same bright eyes, the same joyful energy. Susan looked at Mark, her eyes filled with emotion. "Finally, my love," she said softly, "we have our son back." Mark's eyes welled with tears as he gazed at Toby, then turned to Susan. Without a word, he pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms holding her close. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Susan nestled into him, her heart swelling with love. "We've come through so much, Mark. Together." And in that moment, with Toby in the room, they both felt the weight of their journey lift, replaced by the pure joy of a second chance at happiness.